The prairie breathed like a sleeping beast beneath the amber dawn, each blade of grass trembling in the hush before day's first sound. Kaya Whitebird walked the narrow trail with a tin pail swaying from her hand, her moccasins whispering through dust that carried the scent of sage and smoke. The sky stretched endless above her, wide enough to hold a lifetime of silence. She had grown used to that silence, how it followed her, how it filled her lungs instead of laughter. People in town said she was too proud to bow, too strange to belong. But she bowed every morning to the earth itself, for it was the only thing that had never turned her away. That morning her path led toward the Blackthorn Ranch, a place folks whispered about in the saloon, a house where loneliness itself was said to keep watch. The man who lived there, Dakota Blackthorn, had not spoken more than a handful of words in years. Some said he'd buried his brother and his heart in the same grave. Others claimed he could still hear the war in his sleep. Kaya didn't know which story to believe, but work was scarce, and dust didn't judge the hands that swept it away. When she reached the gate, the boards leaned as if weary of standing. The house crouched beyond it, gray-timbered and silent, its windows dull as unblinking eyes. She lifted the latch and stepped inside the yard, feeling the air shift, a kind of waiting like the moment before thunder speaks. She knocked once. No answer came, only the wind tugging at her braid. The door opened halfway. A man stood there, tall, rough around the edges, a shadow carved against light. His eyes were the color of river mud after rain, and they held the kind of stillness that makes a person forget to breathe. "Don't need company," he said. His voice was quiet, yet it filled the space like smoke from a dying fire. Kaya lowered her gaze, clutching the pail. "Then I'll just clean the dust, mister. It doesn't mind being alone." He studied her, the brown skin sun-browned deeper, the small scars on her fingers. Something flickered across his face, not welcome but not refusal either. He stepped aside and she entered. The room smelled of tobacco, old wood, and the faint sadness that comes from unspoken names. She set to work without another word. Her movements were deliberate, a silent rhythm that belonged to survival. Wash, rinse, wring, repeat. Each sweep of the cloth revealed not just the grain of the wood but the pattern of a life left untouched. She imagined he once had someone to care for these things, a mother, a brother, maybe a wife. But ghosts need no housekeeping, and neither did he, not really. Still he watched her. He sat by the window repairing a bridle, his fingers moving with slow precision. Once she caught his reflection in the glass, eyes following the dust she stirred. For an instant she wondered what he saw, a worker, a stranger, or some echo of the woman he'd lost. The thought unsettled her. By noon the floor gleamed. Kaya gathered her rag and turned toward the door. "That'll be all, Mr. Blackthorn." He didn't reply. But as she reached the threshold he said softly, "You missed a spot by the hearth." When she bent to clean it she found a small wooden carving there, a horse roughly shaped, one leg broken. She brushed it carefully as if touching bone. He didn't tell her to stop. Outside the wind had risen. Dust rolled like smoke over the fields. Kaya tied her shawl tight and began the long walk back to town. The road shimmered in the sun, and the sound of her own footsteps kept her company. Yet behind her eyelids, when she blinked, she still saw the quiet in his face, that unguarded moment when his eyes had almost softened. Almost. In town people noticed everything. May Hollister, the widow who rented her a corner room, leaned on the railing when Kaya returned. "You been up at the Blackthorn place?" she asked. "You stay clear of that man. He's got ghosts that don't sleep." Kaya only smiled, setting down her pail. "Ghosts don't mind a clean floor either." May frowned, muttering about cursed land and lonely men. The others in town too stared when Kaya passed. They never said her name outright. Half-blood women were easier to whisper about than to greet. She pretended their voices were the rustling of weeds. Pretending was a skill she had perfected. Still, the next morning she rose before dawn and set out again toward the ranch. Curiosity is its own hunger. She told herself it was only for wages, but her heart beat too fast for that to be true. Dakota was in the yard chopping wood. When he saw her he paused, axe hanging mid-air. "Didn't think you'd come back." She shrugged. "Dust don't stop falling just because you tell it to." He gave a sound that might have been a laugh, low and brief. "Coffee's on the porch. Take some if you want." That was how it began, not with a smile but a shared silence that slowly made room for small words. She cleaned, he worked, and between them the day unfolded like a careful truce. He never asked her story and she never asked his, but sometimes when the wind rattled the windows, he'd glance at her as though afraid she'd vanish with it. One evening, a storm gathered over the plains, clouds bruising the horizon. She was folding linens when lightning struck near the barn, sending the horses into panic. Without hesitation she ran outside, skirts whipping around her legs. Dakota was already there, trying to calm the animals, his voice firm but gentle. The wind roared so loud they had to shout. "Hold the gate," he yelled. She braced against it, rain slicing her skin. The horses bolted through, mud splattering her face, and in the chaos the two of them locked eyes, a flash of shared fear, alive and bright. Then the thunder rolled and the moment was gone. By dawn the storm had passed, leaving the land washed clean. Kaya's arms ached, her dress torn, but she felt lighter somehow. Inside the house, Dakota handed her a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed. Neither spoke. Outside, the world smelled of wet earth and beginnings. Days turned into a rhythm, soft, unspoken, fragile. Kaya would hum while sweeping. Dakota would fix a hinge or mend a fence. Sometimes she caught him looking at her as though he'd forgotten what looking felt like. Once he said quietly, "Your hands move like you've been here forever." She smiled, not meeting his eyes. "Maybe I have. But peace never lasts long in places where judgment is currency." Sheriff Cole Ramsey rode up one afternoon, his horse kicking up dust near the porch. "Blackthorn," he called, tipping his hat, "you got yourself company, I see." His tone was oil over water. Kaya straightened, gripping the broom. The sheriff's gaze slid over her, not cruel, just careless enough to sting. "Folks in town say you're keeping her on," he said. "Careful or you'll have more trouble than you need." Dakota's jaw tightened. "She's here to work, that's all." "Sure," the sheriff said, smiling thinly. "Just remember who the law listens to around here." He spat in the dirt and rode off, leaving silence in his wake. Kaya stared after him until the dust settled. "He's right," she murmured. "I'm trouble for anyone who stands too close." Dakota shook his head. "You don't deserve their words." She looked down at her hands. "Then let them have them. I've got dust enough to keep me busy." That night, neither slept. The moon hung low, a pale coin over the black horizon. From the barn came the restless snort of horses, uneasy in the wind. Kaya rose, feeling the prickle of unease crawl up her neck. Then she smelled it, smoke. She ran outside. Flames licked the barn's roof, sparks leaping like angry stars. Dakota burst from the house behind her, shouting, "The horses!" He dashed into the heat without hesitation. Kaya followed, wrapping her shawl around her face. The air was thick, choking. She found a rope and pulled at the stall door, coughing. The wood burned her palms, but it gave way, and the horses burst through, wild and terrified. A beam cracked overhead. Dakota grabbed her arm, dragging her clear as the roof collapsed in a thunder of sparks. They fell into the dirt, coughing, gasping. She realized then her arm was burned, the skin blistered and raw. He looked at her, horror and gratitude tangled in his eyes. "Why'd you do that?" She tried to laugh, breathless. "Because someone has to stay alive to clean." Something in him broke then, not with noise but with stillness. He pressed her hand to his chest, over the steady thud of his heart. "Kaya," he whispered, the word trembling. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The wind carried the rest. Morning came quiet as prayer. Smoke drifted across the fields, but the worst had passed. Kaya woke on the porch, her arm bandaged in linen. Dakota sat beside her, hat in his hands, the lines around his eyes softened. "I don't want a cleaner," he said slowly, as though tasting the truth. "I want a life." Her breath caught. She turned toward him, the sun painting her face gold. "If you'll have me," he went on, voice barely above a whisper, "I choose you, not out of pity but peace." For a long moment neither spoke. The world seemed to wait. Then Kaya smiled, small and trembling. "Peace," she repeated as though testing the word. "It's been a long time since I had any." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then stay. We'll learn it together." The wind moved gently through the yard, carrying away the scent of ash, leaving only the clean breath of morning. Somewhere far off, a meadowlark began to sing. Years later, people would say the Blackthorn place was the cleanest ranch in Montana, not because of soap or sweeping, but because the air there felt lighter, as if sorrow itself had been scrubbed from the walls. They would speak of a man who learned to smile again and a woman who found her name spoken without shame. But if you passed that valley at dusk, you wouldn't see any of that. You'd see two figures sitting side by side on the porch, quiet as the settling dust, sharing the same horizon. And if you listened closely, you might hear the faint hum of her voice, carrying through the twilight, a sound not of labor but of home. And maybe, just maybe, you'd understand that love doesn't arrive like thunder or vows. It comes quietly after the storm, when two broken souls finally choose to stay.